Some movies entertain you, some disturb you. And then there are films that leave a mark you cannot explain. The 1970s changed horror forever. It stripped away comfort and replaced it with something raw and unforgettable. These are not just scary movies. They are experiences that stayed with audiences long after the lights came back on. And as we count down, you will see why some fear never truly fades. Number 13, Black Christmas, 1974. A quiet house filled with laughter becomes something else entirely when the calls begin. At first they sound like pranks, strange voices, broken whispers. Then the tone shifts. Something invasive creeps into every ring of the phone. The girls do not know they are already being watched. That is what makes this film so disturbing. It removes safety without warning. Unlike later slashers that rely on visible killers, this story chooses absence. The threat is hidden. The camera becomes the intruder. It moves through the house like it belongs there. It breathes. It listens. It waits. The audience becomes trapped inside that perspective. You are no longer watching. You are inside the crime. The violence is not constant, yet the fear never leaves. A rocking chair in an attic becomes unforgettable. A voice on the line becomes unbearable. And the ending refuses to comfort you. It leaves something unresolved, something still present. That is why this film lingers. It does not end when the credits roll. It follows you into silence. It makes you question empty rooms. It turns ordinary spaces into something deeply unsafe. Number 12, Rabbid, 1977. It begins with an accident that should have ended quietly. Instead, it creates something worse. A medical procedure saves a life but introduces a hunger that cannot be explained. What follows is not just horror. It is a slow, spreading nightmare that feels disturbingly possible. The terror here is clinical. Cold rooms, white walls, doctors who believe they are in control. Then the infection starts to move. One person becomes two. Two become 10. The city does not notice at first. That delay is what makes it frightening. Horror grows best when it is ignored. This film does not rely on loud shocks. It builds dread through escalation. Each encounter feels slightly more wrong than the last. Each victim becomes part of something larger. A pattern forms and it cannot be stopped. What truly unsettles the viewer is the lack of heroism. There is no clear savior, no moment where everything turns. Only containment attempts, only panic rising beneath the surface. Society begins to fracture in small ways before it collapses in larger ones. By the time the truth becomes undeniable, it is already too late. That is the real horror. Not the transformation itself, but the realization that it could spread without warning, quietly, efficiently, and without mercy. Number 11, Phantasm, 1979. Dreams do not follow rules. That is the first thing this film teaches you. Nothing behaves the way it should. Doors lead to impossible places. People are not who they appear to be. And death does not stay buried. At the center stands a figure who barely speaks, yet dominates every frame. Tall, still, watching. He does not chase. He waits. That patience makes him terrifying. He exists outside urgency, outside logic, and because of that, he cannot be predicted. The film moves like a nightmare. Scenes connect through feeling rather than explanation. A funeral becomes a doorway. A sphere becomes a weapon. A child becomes the only one who sees the truth. Everything feels slightly disconnected from reality. That tension keeps the audience off balance. What makes it traumatic is not just what happens, but how it happens. There is no safe structure, no clear understanding of what is real. The viewer is forced to question every moment. That uncertainty creates a deeper fear than any single shock. By the end, the story offers no comfort. It loops back into itself. It suggests that escape might be impossible, that the nightmare was never contained. And that idea stays with you. Because once reality becomes unstable, fear has no boundaries. Number 10, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. Fear does not always arrive with violence. Sometimes it begins with a glance, a pause in conversation, a subtle change that no one else seems to notice. This film understands that kind of horror better than most. At first, everything appears normal. People go to work. They talk. They smile. But something beneath the surface starts to shift. Emotions feel muted. Reactions feel delayed. The world becomes slightly off in a way that cannot be explained. Then the truth emerges. Identity itself is under attack. Not through force, but through replacement. Quiet. Efficient. Total. The idea that someone you trust can become something else without warning is deeply unsettling. It removes the ability to rely on anyone. The tension builds through paranoia. Every interaction becomes suspect. Every silence becomes suspicious. The audience is forced into constant vigilance. You begin to search faces for signs of change. You start to question who is still human. What makes this film traumatic is its inevitability. There is no clear way to fight what is happening. Resistance feels temporary. Survival feels uncertain. And the ending delivers one of the most haunting images in horror history. It confirms the worst possible outcome, that the transformation is complete, that there is no escape. And once that realization settles in, the fear becomes permanent, because the threat is no longer external, it is everywhere. Number 9, Don't Look Now, 1973. Grief is not loud. It does not announce itself with screams or sudden violence. It settles quietly. It changes how the world looks. And in this film, that quiet transformation becomes something far more dangerous. What begins as loss slowly turns into dread that cannot be explained. Set against the cold beauty of Venice, the story follows a couple trying to rebuild after tragedy. But the city itself feels wrong. The narrow alleys trap movement. The water reflects distorted images. Every corner hides something unseen. This is not a place of healing. It is a place that amplifies fear. The horror here is psychological. There are no monsters waiting in the dark. Instead, there are glimpses. A red coat disappearing into shadows. A figure just out of reach. These fragments build tension in a way that feels almost unbearable. The audience is forced to question what is real and what is imagined. What makes the film truly unsettling is its manipulation of time and perception. Scenes do not follow simple logic. Moments echo each other. Images repeat with slight differences. It creates a feeling that something is deeply wrong but impossible to define. And then comes the ending. Sudden, brutal, completely unexpected. It does not just shock. It redefines everything that came before it. The realization hits all at once, and it lingers long after the film ends. This is not horror that fades. It stays in the mind. It makes you question what you see. And more importantly, it makes you question what you might have missed. Number 8, Last House on the Left, 1972. There is a line that horror films often respect. A boundary that separates fiction from something more disturbing. This film crosses that line without hesitation. And once it does, there is no way back. The story is deceptively simple. Two young women encounter a group of criminals. What follows is not stylized violence or cinematic thrills. It is raw. It is uncomfortable. It feels real in a way that audiences were not prepared for at the time. What makes this film traumatic is its refusal to soften anything. There is no heroic intervention, no moment where the horror pauses to let the audience breathe. The events unfold with a blunt honesty that feels almost documentary in tone. Even more disturbing is the emotional impact. The violence is not just physical, it is psychological. It strips away any sense of safety. It forces the viewer to confront cruelty in its most direct form. Then the narrative shifts. The parents discover what has happened, and what follows is not justice in the traditional sense. It is something darker. Revenge that mirrors the brutality that came before it. The film challenges the idea of morality. It asks uncomfortable questions about how far someone will go when pushed beyond reason. There is no clean resolution, no comforting message, only the aftermath of actions that cannot be undone. This is why the film remains so difficult to watch. It does not feel like entertainment. It feels like something witnessed, something endured. And that distinction is what made it so controversial and so unforgettable. Number 7, The Omen, 1976. Some fears arrive slowly. Others announce themselves in a single unforgettable moment. This film does both. It begins with a quiet decision, a secret adoption, a choice made out of love. But beneath that choice, something far darker has already taken root. At first, the child appears ordinary, calm, silent, observant. Yet there is something unsettling about that stillness, something unnatural in the way he watches the world. The adults around him begin to feel it before they understand it, a sense that something is deeply wrong but impossible to explain. Then the signs begin. A sudden outburst, an animal reacting with panic, a moment that breaks the illusion completely. What follows is a chain of events that feel less like coincidence and more like design. Deaths occur with shocking precision, each one more disturbing than the last. The horror here is not chaos, it is control. Everything unfolds with purpose. That is what makes it terrifying. The characters are not simply unlucky. They are trapped in something inevitable. The film builds tension through inevitability. The father tries to deny what he sees. Then he tries to fight it. But every step forward only reveals a deeper truth. The realization grows heavier with each discovery. And when that truth finally becomes undeniable, it is almost too late. The climax does not offer relief. It delivers a final confirmation that the worst possibility was real all along. This is what stays with the audience, not just the events, but the idea behind them. That evil does not always appear monstrous. Sometimes it looks innocent. Sometimes it waits. And when it reveals itself, it is already too powerful to stop. Number 6. Carrie, 1976. The horror in this story does not begin with the supernatural. It begins with cruelty. Small moments of humiliation that build over time, laughter that cuts deeper than violence, isolation that turns into something far more dangerous. Carrie White lives in a world that offers her no escape. At school, she is an outsider. At home, she is controlled by fear disguised as faith. Every part of her life is shaped by pressure, and that pressure continues to build. The film takes its time with this tension. It allows the audience to feel every moment of discomfort, every insult, every glance. The horror is emotional before it becomes physical. That is what makes the transformation so powerful. When her abilities begin to surface, they are not portrayed as gifts. They are extensions of everything she has endured. Each moment of telekinesis feels like a release of something that has been held back for too long. Then comes the prom. A setting that should represent acceptance becomes something else entirely. The scene unfolds with a slow sense of dread. The audience knows something is coming. The question is how far it will go. When it happens, it is overwhelming. Fire, chaos, destruction. The shift from vulnerability to power is absolute, and it is terrifying. But what makes the film unforgettable is not just the violence, it is the tragedy behind it. Carrie is not simply a force of destruction. She is a victim who was pushed beyond her limits. And when the final moment arrives, it does not offer peace. It delivers one last shock that lingers in the mind. Because the true horror is not what she became. It is what made her that way. Number 5. Suspiria, 1977. Color should not feel dangerous. Yet in this film, it becomes the source of unease. Bright reds flood the screen. Deep blues swallow entire rooms. Every frame feels alive in a way that is almost unnatural. This is not a world grounded in reality. It is something heightened, something distorted. From the moment the protagonist arrives at the academy, the atmosphere feels wrong. Rain pours with unnatural force. Doors open without explanation. Faces appear and disappear as if they belong to another dimension. The building itself feels aware, watching, waiting. The horror here is sensory. Sound and image combine to create tension that never fully releases. Music rises suddenly. Silence follows just as quickly. The viewer is kept in a constant state of imbalance. You are never allowed to feel comfortable. Violence arrives without warning, brutal, stylized. Almost dreamlike in its execution. The contrast between beauty and brutality makes each moment more unsettling. It feels like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. What truly disturbs is the lack of clear logic. Events do not follow traditional rules. Characters move through spaces that seem to shift around them. Time feels inconsistent. It creates a sense that reality itself is unstable. As the truth begins to surface, it does not bring clarity. It deepens the mystery. The revelation feels less like an answer and more like confirmation that something ancient and hidden has been present all along. By the end, the viewer is left disoriented, not just by what happened, but by how it was experienced. The film does not resolve neatly. It lingers as a feeling rather than a story, and that feeling stays. Because it suggests that horror does not need explanation. It only needs presence. Number 4. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. At first, it looks like chaos. News reports breaking down. Authorities losing control. Voices speaking over each other with growing urgency. The world is already collapsing before the audience fully understands why. Then, the scale becomes clear. The dead are no longer staying dead. They are moving, gathering, spreading. What begins as confusion quickly becomes a complete breakdown of order. The film places its characters inside a shopping mall. A place designed for comfort and routine becomes something else entirely. Empty corridors stretch endlessly. Bright lights reveal nothing but silence. It feels safe at first, controlled, protected. But that safety is an illusion. The outside world presses inward, slowly, relentlessly. The dead do not rush. They advance with certainty. That steady movement becomes more terrifying than any sudden attack. What makes this film so traumatic is its reflection of reality. The mall represents normal life, consumption, habit, repetition. Watching it become a battleground creates a disturbing contrast. It forces the viewer to see familiar spaces in a completely different way. Violence is more explicit here than in earlier entries. The effects are graphic, unflinching, yet they serve a purpose beyond shock. They reinforce the idea that the world has changed permanently. As time passes, the characters begin to lose something essential, not just safety, but identity. Isolation sets in. Routine replaces meaning. Survival becomes mechanical. The horror is no longer just external. It becomes internal. A slow realization that even if you survive, you may not remain the same. And when the film reaches its final moments, it offers no easy answer, only a choice. Continue forward into uncertainty or remain trapped in a world that no longer exists. Either way, the fear remains. Number 3. Halloween, 1978. Silence can be more terrifying than noise. This film understands that better than almost anything that came before it. There are no elaborate explanations, no complex motivations, just a shape moving through quiet streets with purpose that cannot be reasoned with. It begins with something simple, a suburban home, a night that should feel safe. Then violence arrives without warning, clean, sudden, unemotional. That opening sets the tone for everything that follows. Years later, the presence returns. Not louder, not more aggressive, just more certain. Michael Myers does not rush. He does not shout. He watches. He waits. That patience turns him into something almost inhuman, a force rather than a person. The film builds fear through observation. Long stretches where nothing happens, yet everything feels wrong. A figure standing at a distance. A shape behind a hedge. A mask that reveals nothing. The audience becomes hyper-aware of every movement. What makes it traumatic is the setting. This is not a distant location, it is a neighborhood that feels familiar. Houses that look like your own. Streets that should feel safe. The horror invades everyday life without resistance. The music intensifies that tension. A simple repeating pattern that never fully resolves. It creates anticipation that something is always about to happen. And often it does. When violence finally strikes, it is quick, almost casual. That lack of emotion makes it more disturbing. There is no anger, no hesitation, only action. By the end, there is no sense of closure. The threat is not defeated. It disappears. And that absence becomes the final fear. Because if it can vanish, it can return. And if it can return, it was never truly gone. Number 2. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Heat hangs in the air from the very first moment. The landscape feels dry, lifeless. Something about the environment itself suggests that nothing good can survive here. And that feeling only grows stronger as the story unfolds. A group of young travelers enters this space without understanding what it holds. At first, it seems abandoned. Empty houses, quiet roads, but there are signs. Subtle details that hint at something deeply wrong. Bones arranged like decorations. objects placed without purpose, a sense of decay that goes beyond neglect. Then the illusion breaks. Violence arrives suddenly and without warning. One moment of normalcy followed by something brutal and immediate. There is no buildup, no preparation, just impact. The figure behind that violence is unforgettable, not because of complexity, but because of unpredictability. Leatherface does not behave like a typical villain. His actions feel chaotic, almost instinctive. That lack of structure makes him more frightening. The film does not rely on polished visuals. It feels raw, unfiltered. The camera moves with urgency. The sound design is harsh. Every scream echoes longer than it should. The audience is not given space to detach. What makes it traumatic is the intensity. The second half becomes a sustained experience of panic. There is no pause, no relief, just a continuous escalation of fear and desperation. The infamous dinner scene captures this perfectly. It feels less like fiction and more like something witnessed. The chaos, the noise, the confusion. It overwhelms the senses. And when the film finally ends, it does not resolve neatly. It leaves behind a feeling of exhaustion, of having survived something rather than watched it. That is why it affected audiences so deeply. It did not feel like a story. It felt like an experience that could not be escaped. Number 1. Alien, 1979. It does not begin with a scream. It begins with isolation. The spaceship drifts through endless darkness, a fragile capsule carrying a crew unaware of what waits beyond. The vast emptiness outside sets the tone. Nothing can come to help, nothing can interfere, and no one can escape. That quiet vulnerability makes the horror immediate. At first, the danger is subtle, a mysterious signal, a life form brought aboard under routine inspection. The crew believes themselves in control. Procedures are followed, yet something far older, far more intelligent has already taken root. Every shadow feels heavy. Every vent, every corner carries potential threat. The tension builds through what is unseen. The monster's absence becomes more terrifying than its presence. Then it strikes, slowly, deliberately. Each attack is precise. There is no chaos, no excessive noise, only inevitability. The crew cannot predict it, cannot reason with it, and cannot outrun it. The alien grows, adapts, and haunts the corridors in a way that turns familiar technology and cramped living spaces into traps. The ship itself becomes a character, complicit in the terror, echoing every breath, every footstep. What makes this film traumatic is its blend of realism and otherworldliness. The crew is human, fallible, trapped by circumstance. The alien is unstoppable, merciless, utterly alien. Survival is uncertain. Every decision carries weight. Every delay has consequences. Fear escalates not through spectacle, but through inevitability, through the quiet realization that nowhere is safe and help will never arrive. The climax delivers a confrontation both physical and psychological. Even the escape feels fragile, temporary, uncertain. The tension does not end when the credits roll, it lingers. Alien does not just frighten, it inhabits your mind, turning ordinary spaces into claustrophobic threats and leaving you questioning what might be lurking in the corners of your own world. Fear in this film is not entertainment. It is survival. If these films still unsettle you decades later, then they did something right. Horror is not about what you see. It is about what stays in your mind after. Tell us which one disturbed you the most. And if you are brave enough, there are always more waiting to be discovered.